everyone, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn Lorna, the 75th in this series. I'll do what I often do and just wait a second for some people to join us and then I'll get started. So welcome to the 75th Learn with Lorna. My name is Lorna and I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service, as you'll know if you've watched before, has 4 offices across the Highlands that look after the historic documents relating to this part of the world. We have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, Skye and Lochailse Archive Centre in Portree, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the Learn with Lorna series of films. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very, very grateful for that, and there's a link to be able to do so, whether you're watching on Facebook or watching on YouTube afterwards. And as a reminder, you can go back and watch all previous episodes on YouTube if you would like to do so. Thank you for saying hello, everyone. Always love it when I start to see people saying hello. Hi Maureen and June. So this week we are looking at stories of migration. This subject links August's theme of travel and transport across to September's theme of life stories. I'm looking at documents today where travelling and migrating and moving to another country has been a key turning point in people's lives. People who have travelled across the world and settled either permanently or temporarily in another country. Obviously this is something that is a very, very current subject, something we're seeing in the news a lot at the moment as well. We're looking in this episode at the perspective of people who have left Scotland as opposed to people coming in. As you'll know, as you're watching, we've got a diverse audience who watch Learn with Lorna. I'm seeing there Linda in New Zealand coming up. So we have people in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Germany, China, Netherlands, right across the UK. And my guess is that one of the things we all have in common is a link to travel and migration. Some people are watching from places where their ancestors have gone from Scotland and settled in those countries, and many of us in the UK will know of family members who left to go and live in another country. So if that is your experience, then please do put that in, whether you're in the UK and you know of family who left, or whether, like Elizabeth, hi, Linda, Tanya, people who are watching on the other side of the world who are quite possibly there because of people who left Scotland. So please tell us your story if that's your case. So what do our collections reveal about the experiences of people who left the Highlands? First of all, I wanted to look at why people have left. There's a huge variety of reasons. People have left, first of all, in pursuit of trade, wealth and prosperity. So we hold a variety of documents that talk about people risking long, dangerous journeys to other countries in the hope of making a fortune. There's a letter from our Bailey of Dineen collection, which I have maybe mentioned before, but if so, it's because it is one of my absolute favourite documents, written from the Isle of Nevis in the Caribbean, and it includes these words: "The great numbers that from all nations resort hither, from a very mistaken notion indeed, that gold may be got here for the gathering of it. There is no people more deceived in this respect than the Scots, who flock to foreign settlements in large numbers every year." So that gives some indication. That letter was written in the 1700s, and that's an example of people who are leaving the Highlands, leaving Scotland in pursuit of wealth and trade. Other people left for a short period or a long period in connection with the military. So that's particularly visible in some of our big family and estate collections, and you'll maybe remember that if you watched last week when I was talking about the fantastic Bailey of Dineen collection. There are people there who left the Highlands at a young age and spent most of their lives in other countries and away from Scotland. So I spoke last week about Bailey of Dineen and also touched on Munro of Navarre. These are great examples. We have huge collections for both of those families, and both have large swathes of documents from family members who went to other countries, and in particular India. Fraser Tytler collection, which I've done a talk specifically on, has numerous letters from South Africa written during the Boer War. So sometimes it's service in the military that takes people away. And of course, throughout history, as we are all too aware in the past and tragically in the current as well, People often have to leave their homes as a result of conflict or crisis. So sometimes that's through choice because they want to get away from that situation. Sometimes it's out of sheer necessity because they have no other option. From a Highland perspective, this includes people who left the Highlands as a result of the Jacobite risings or as a result of the Highland clearances, and probably that's the two things that people associate most with migration from the Highlands: waves of people either leaving voluntarily or being forced to leave. And when I say forced, I mean either literally forced or through a lack of any other real viable option for their future. I've done Learn with Lornas on Jacobites and on the clearances in the past, so I'm not going to look at that specifically here, but please do go back and watch those if you're interested in those topics. Some people left in pursuit of a better life. That is a huge step now, as I know from my own immediate family. That's a huge step to make the jump from leaving what is known to you in pursuit of what you hope will be a better life. A huge step now, but a much bigger step in the past when transport and communication and the chance of return were all so different from what they are now. Again, some people made that choice as a real choice, and others made it because the situation in Scotland had become so difficult for them that that was really the only viable option that they had left. And societies like the Highlands and Islands Emigration Society and various other societies all played a big part in that, in enabling people to leave Scotland and go in pursuit of a better life. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on those societies, but if you're interested in them, I would really recommend looking at Scotland's People website. That has a very detailed history of the Highlands and Islands Emigration Society and other similar bodies. And also scan the Knowledge Network. If you type that in, there's information on there as well. But what I want to do today is look not so much at the process of migration, but the emotional experiences of the letters that we hold. So the people, what were they feeling when they made that decision? What can our collections tell us about this? But I will come back at the end to point out those resources again if you're interested in finding out more about the process. Now, I've read out before a 1775 letter from Baillie of Dinane, which refers to the spirit of emigration to America daily spreading and gaining strength. It mentions hundreds of people going to America from right across Scotland, despite the situation and the turbulence in America at that time, because of course that was at the time of the Wars of Independence, where America was fighting to gain its independence from Britain. I love that letter because it shows the sheer scale of people who were leaving the Highlands, a contemporary account of the numbers of people leaving and going to America. The second statistical account from Strath in the Isle of Skye reveals the scale of emigration 70 years later in Skye. Just a few years before, the Highlands and Islands Emigration Society chose Skye as one of the main locations that they would focus on due to the extreme poverty of the island at that time. So they chose Skye as a place to take people from in pursuit of a better existence. But this is written in 1845, just before that. Within the last 3 years, about 200 souls have emigrated to Australia from this parish, Strath in Skye. It is earnestly hoped that the favourable accounts of those who have settled in Australia will induce many of the people to avail themselves of the great boon which is now offered to them, viz. A free passage, with every necessary and desirable comfort during the voyage. So satisfied is the writer of this account of the prosperity of that colony that he has done all in his power to persuade his poor countrymen to emigrate to that country, and to convince them of his good intention, as well as to prove the sincerity of his advice. He has himself sent thither 3 of his sons within the last 2 years, and if spared for a few months longer, he proposes to send a 4th. So that's from April 1840, and that's the minister of Strath saying that there's so much potential and it's so much a better life in Australia that he's sent 3 of his children, hopes to send another, and encourages everybody to leave Skye and go. So those are just a couple of examples that show the big numbers that we're dealing with leaving. What do the collections tell us about the experiences of those people when they left? First of all, I want to have a look at some of the reasons for going. So I mentioned it's pursuit of a better life. What does that really mean? So this is an extract from a letter written by John Grant in Philadelphia. He wrote it in 1811 and he's writing back to his parents in Inverness. Had you known, you say, as much of this country 20 years ago as you do now, you would come here yourself. Undoubtedly, America is a great country, and it will be a most powerful country. Nature intended that it should be so. In extent it is immense, and from the variety of climate it affords not only the necessaries, but the luxuries of life in great abundance. So it's an interesting prophetic letter, that, talking about the fact that one day America will come to be a most powerful country. The extent of the land, the climate, the necessaries and the luxuries. So there's a belief there that this is the promised land, the new world. A letter written by him 10 years later, around about 10 years later, talks about all the Highlanders who are surrounding him. So he says, I'm surrounded by other people from the Highlands, and by this point he's in Illinois, and he says that we are all thriving with wealth and riches. So there's the prospect of work, of land, which is a big contentious issue in the Highlands at the time, of money, of food. And remember that some of these things were written at a time where Scotland was dealing with crop failure, with famine, with desperate poverty and hardship. Some people went because they recognised that that was the best choice of making a living and then being able to send money home to support their family, which I feel is really such a current thing. That desire has never gone away. So this is an extract from a letter by Colin McKinnon, written when he was in Montana to his brother Christopher in Inverness in 1893. It seems that mother has had a bad turn, probably brought on by lack of proper food, which I regret, and I also regret that I am not in a position to prevent it, but it is of some satisfaction to me to know that I have done my duty towards her. I may also say that I have done much more for her than any other, inasmuch as I have denied myself so that I might help her, and give her so much that if the rest of the family had given her so much, she might now be well off. If I get steady employment here, I will endeavour to give her about twice as much as I was able to give her when I was still in that country. I may mention that I give her between £8 or £9 or the worth of it last year, and I will try and give her 10 this year. So a real feeling that he's trying to do the best for his family. He is able to do something for her that he would never have been able to have done if he had stayed in Scotland. There is a desire to provide a living for the current generation, a future for the next generation, but also a support for the previous generation, which, as I say, I think is something that's very current. I wanted to share a couple of documents that talk about the journey to the new country. First, an 1853 letter written by William Michael, written from New South Wales, Australia, to his brother, describing his journey from Sutherland in the north of Scotland to Australia. It is a long letter, but I want to share it with you because there's just so much in it. Dear Robert, he writes, I arrived in this colony on the 17th of September after a good passage, but it was not a quick one. We are 98 days sailing, and worse than that, we were kept 3 weeks in quarantine at Fort Phillip, for sickness being on board the vessel. It was on the 9th of October when we got ashore. I'm very sorry to relate to you that I had 2 children dead since I last saw you. My youngest lass, Janet, died on the voyage on the 21st of August, and my wife had a son on the 26th of November, and he was only alive 5 days. But I am happy to say that my wife is keeping in good health herself, since there was about 40 children died on the voyage and 7 persons between men and women, and among them was Peter Allison's wife. She died a short time after sailing from Liverpool, and George Douglas, William Turnbull's good son, died about the Cape of Good Hope. They both died of consumption. Nobody who has got any bad trouble about them needs think that they will stand this voyage, and I would not advise any man to come out by the government ships with a weak family, for they put such a number on board that the want of room and foul air just destroys all the weak children. I have to inform you that I saw Alexander, my brother, and him and his family are looking very well, and he is within 25 miles of me. We happened to come ashore the same week at Melbourne. There was only 2 deaths on the vessel that he came on, and only 350 passengers. We had 950 emigrants and 60 men of a ship's crew. Therefore, if you ever intend to come here, come before you have any family. I am a shepherd with Captain Hepburn, Smeaton Hill. I have £50 yearly, and that is the least wages that's going in this colony. There are some of the shepherds and labourers that have £100 yearly and rations, but you may all understand that when strangers come into the colony, that the masters take advantage of them. I and a great many more engaged on board the vessel for lodgings that were very dear in Melbourne at the time, and you all know that I had no money and I had to do the best I could. But I am as well off as I would wish to be, unless I was idle altogether. If I and my wife are alive and in good health, I will soon be an independent man in this country. I and one George Melville from Gordonbush, Sutherland, is stopping in the one hut. He is a very fine man. He came out on the same vessel as me. If I be alive in another year, I and Alexander is going to the gold diggings. They are digging the gold within a mile of my hut. Now, dear brother, I hope that you will make up your mind and come here the next year, you and Donald MacLeod and John, my brother. The sooner you come, the better. For this is a most beautiful country. It is all green to the tops of the hills. You can take a cart on any road in this country. There's no such thing as a made road in it except the coach road to Sydney. They cannot get the men to make road. Whenever a man makes a little money here, he's off to the gold diggings. Some make their fortune in a very short time, but a man will soon be independent here if he should not go to the diggings at all, as the land is very cheap here. You will get the grass of a sheep here for a halfpenny. As soon as you receive this, you will write to me if you intend to come. This is the place for a poor man. I'm sorry the way that shepherds and labourers are used in Scotland and the way they're thought on. They would turn you away if you do the least thing wrong there, but that is not the way here. I wouldn't take a bad word off my master here. If I was to leave him, I would soon get another, and the farmer knows that well. I assure you that a man will go far wrong here before his master will say anything that is bad to him. But I am well pleased with my master, and if I keep my health, I will serve him this year until the 8th of October, 1853. I hope you have the goodness to send this letter to Donald MacLeod, for I am going to write a few lines to him. Dear sir, I hope you will now keep your mind and come out here, you and all your brethren and my own 2 brothers. I hope that you're all in good health when you receive this letter, and that you will get ready and come here. This is the place for a man that can work for wages. There are plenty of meat and money in this country, but it is needless for a lazy man or a drunkard to come. But if ever you intend on coming, come as soon as possible before your family gets any more in numbers, for children are a great trouble on the voyage. We got plenty of good victuals on the voyage, but there were too many on board, and although there was a great death, fortunately no bad fever came on board, such as smallpox or measles, but there were a great number that took the ship fever, and my wife took it, but I was not very poorly for a long time. We all have good health at present. It was the cold and the bowel complaint that destroyed all the children. Any of you that intend coming, take plenty of clothes and flannel with you. This country is not near as warm as is reported at home. Sydney is much warmer than this colony. I've got no word from James yet, but it's not long since I wrote him. Every word that I have put here is as true as I have got to meet with death. I hope that I will see you here soon. Give my kind love to my mother. If she is alive still, tell her that we are as well off as we could hope to be, although we have met with hardship since I left Scotland. If I'm alive for another year, I will send her what will do her good during her lifetime. So as I say, it's a very long extract to read to you, but I wanted to share it because there's just so much about the experience of that journey recorded in that document. And the letter also raises a point that we see again and again and again in these collections. People encouraging other people to come with them. And I saw somebody commenting earlier, I can't see your name anymore I'm afraid, but somebody commenting earlier saying that they had gone, a family member had gone because his brothers had gone before him. And we see that all throughout these documents. There's a desire to share the experience with someone you know, even if it's a bad experience, a hard experience. And there's also a lot of references to seeking out other Highlanders, other Scots, or other people from across the UK, and you could hear that in that extract. There's another Highlander near me. There's another one that talks about travelling across America because he's heard there's a place where there's a lot of English people, so he's going to go and be near them because they've got a shared foot in the home country. On arrival, of course, people started to look for work. Or they started the work that they'd been promised. So some people left the Highlands with a promise of a job at the other end. Colin McKinnon, who we've heard from before, wrote this letter home in 1893, again to his brother. Dear brother, I am writing to let you know that I am well in health and also that I am well employed. I am about 200 miles further west than I was in the summer. The weather is better and the climate is milder. I am stationed within 5 miles of the Rocky Mountains. I have a flock of about 1,200 wethers, which are rams, to look after. There are 10,000 sheep in this place. It's the largest place about here. There is one shepherd from Scotland here besides me. So again, that talking about work, but that link to somebody else who understands where you've come from. But of course, it wasn't all as easy as that letter makes it sound. And this is a later letter from the same person, from Colin McKinnon, that talks about why it's not always as easy as they believed it would be. I suppose you will have read about the state of this country now, America, so I will not say, I don't need to say much more about it. There's a considerable change for the worse for everyone since last year. I haven't done much yet for less than 40 a month, but I'm afraid that I shall now have to work for much less, as there are many idle men in the country and wages are being cut on all hands. Those last two extracts, both from 1893, which was a period now known as the Panic of 1893, which was an economic crisis, depression in America caused by the collapse of two huge American companies. This crash of the companies led to a stock market crash and led massively to the weakening of the American currency. So again, something that we're very familiar with. If we remember when some of the suppliers went down, that led to Woolworths collapsing, that led to that knock-on effect, and the effect that that then has on the banks and on the society. And so that is a contemporary letter written from that point, going to the promise of a new world and very quickly realising that the new world is potentially as susceptible to problems as the old world was. Different problems, but nonetheless. To my mind, one of the most interesting things and incredibly challenging things for migrants in the past, and certainly now as well, is how to keep a foot in your home country, a connection to who you are and where you've come from, while investing yourself in your new country and playing a part in the life there. So you want to be a part of the society that you've chosen to move into, but you don't want to lose where you've come from and who you are. So how do you manage that? How do you belong in two places, and how does that get harder with each subsequent generation? I would be interested to hear your thoughts if you have any opinions on that. I imagine that gets much harder as the connection to the country weakens through the generations. And these collections are full of things like that, full of news being sent from the Highlands and being asked for. There's an awareness in the letters that connections are weakening, that the next generation won't be as invested in Scotland as the previous generation was. So there are requests for copies of local papers, there are requests for books that are peculiar to home and will keep me in mind of the old country. There's a beautifully written letter, in every sense of the word, beautiful calligraphy in it, paleography in it, written by a young child, Mary Grant, in Philadelphia, and she's writing to her aunt, and it reads like this. I wish you would come over and see us. We would be very glad to see you. I entirely forgot to tell you that I was learning music. I can now play a few Scotch songs, but my teacher will not allow me to play any tunes, but keeps me wholly upon my lessons. So there's a reference there to learning Scottish songs. There's another one that talks about people learning dancing. And so there's that reference to holding on to something of the homeland. And we see that in the legacy across, I'm sure those people who are watching in Australia and New Zealand can comment on this, but we see that in the legacy of Gaelic being spoken, of Highland dancing societies, Burns suppers, wearing tartan, Highland games, right across the world. And it's a feeling of a need to keep the foot in both camps. I wanted to finish by telling you about one particular document that we hold in Nucleus, our archives in Caithness. It's a detailed diary of one man, James Robertson Youngson. He was a civil engineer who left Scotland in 1884 at the age of 30 to go to Australia on board a ship called the Arthurson, an iron-hulled bark with 3 masts. This one document, James's diary, gives us an astonishing and fantastic insight into a long journey to Australia, over 2 months journey to Australia, in a ship which had no heating, of course, other than the fire that was used for cooking, no toilets, just a latrine area, a latrine, listen to this description, and visualise this, a latrine area just above the waterline of the ship with slats in the floor so that the sea could get in and wash the latrine area out. Which you do get the feeling, as my colleague Anne in Nucleus said, that seems like that would get a bit dicey on a rough journey. There was, of course, no connection with any other vessels except flags at Semaphore. Navigation at the time, of course, was difficult and reliant on very accurate instruments, so sextants, marine compasses, things like that, and also an immense knowledge and skill on behalf of the crew and the captain, ability to read charts, to read the stars, and so on. James's diary unusually names the captain and the crew of his ship, and it was through this, he doesn't actually name the ship, but it was through the fact that he named the captain and the crew that we were able to find out through the records of ships arriving that survive in Australia that he arrived in February 1885 on the Arthurson. And that's an interesting point if you're researching this. Generally, to find out which ship people came on, it's always best to start at the port of arrival, because often those manifest lists that check off the people as they arrive into a country, they survive in the country of arrival rather than the country of departure. James's diary includes stories of amazing moments on the journey. So he records seeing whales surfacing and blowing next to the ship, and imagine what that would have been like to see for the first time. He talks about encountering an albatross for the first time and how taken he is by the scale of the albatross. It, of course, doesn't stop him trying to kill it. He mentions key moments in the voyage, so things like on the last day of November he records that the ship's crew saw land, the island of Antonio, he says, which is now believed to be the island of Santo Antão, one of the Cape Verde islands. He talks about passing another ship nearby that island, and that because they saw the other ship coming close enough to them that they could signal, all the passengers dashed downstairs to write letters to send, because they knew that ship was going to England and the letters might get back. And that's something certainly that I have talked about before, a thought that constantly arrests me of how many of these letters have been lost as ships went down and so on. Like William Michael in that letter, that long document that I read out, James's diary also makes reference to sickness on board, to people being tightly packed in with little ventilation, poor hygiene, although at least in James's case they had been provided with citrus fruits to stave off scurvy. Something that, of course, they had learnt by that point, but before they had learnt that was a catastrophic sickness on board a ship. James also noted in his diary the changing night sky, which again, something we know about now and we take for granted, but he talks about approaching and crossing the equator, the disappearance of the North Star and the appearance of the Southern Cross, and how extraordinary it was for them to witness that. And of course, the weather features, as you might imagine. He talks about the storms as they cross, as they go round the Cape of Good Hope, the lack of wind in the doldrums, and the snow that fell on board the ship, allowing him to throw snowballs at his fellow passengers. And in fact, it's the weather that features in the diary's last entry on the 29th of January 1885. It describes a storm. He says the sea was running after us mountains high, terrific waves coming home with terrific force. There's a very heavy sea breaking over the galley, filling the vessel and carrying everything movable with it. And if I'm hesitating here, it's because this is one of my great terrors is being in a big sea. I find that incredibly frightening. He says the sea comes thundering on, rushing past and over the galley like a demon. We note that something is wrong as our decks are quite full of water from rail to rail, and then clinging on to what they can lay hold of, the ship is broaching, and sea after sea after sea is coming over. The expression on everyone's face is just fear. He then writes, Ebb and Taylor have gone. They were washed overboard with the wheel, which is away, and the captain has got his leg broken. James then went on to help nurse the captain and replace the wheel, and the diary ends with a list of all the damage sustained to the ship. If he hadn't listed the crew and the captain, then the Nucleus team wouldn't have been able to track down the passenger list and find out that the name of the ship and the fact that it had in fact arrived safely, which is extraordinary when you think of that, the wheel getting broken, people washed overboard, everything movable being swept off the deck. But we know now that that ship survived and that that ship went into Australia. Nucleus have done a very long and detailed blog about a blog post about this document, which includes images of all the pages of the diary. So I would really recommend reading it if you are interested in finding out more about that story and about that shared experience of probably everyone throughout hundreds of years who left the Highlands to go to another country will have had to experience that sort of journey to some extent. James had the advantage of being apparently fairly wealthy, which would have cushioned him to some extent, but nevertheless. So if you want to read that, if you just type into your search engine Nucleus Archives blog, you'll get all of the blogs, and that one will be there. I hope that's been of some interest. I hope you've enjoyed finding out some of those stories. Further information about migration, about the process of leaving Scotland, can be found at Scotland's People, so the Highlands and Islands Immigration Society, and there's other guides about emigration and how to research the subject of migration. And also, as I mentioned, the SCAN knowledge base, so SCAN, SCAN knowledge base. If you search that, you can find those records, and I can share those links as well if that's helpful. I hope you can join me next week. Next week we are looking at the papers of Jane Durham. Jane Durham was an activist who campaigned to conserve buildings, historic buildings right across the Highlands, Pictish stones and so on. A vast amount of knowledge in the Jane Durham collection. So I hope you can join me for that. And on Saturday we will be uploading a video at 11 o'clock looking at a tour of the Highland Archive Centre, as we would normally be doing a doors open day and welcoming people in, and we're not able to do that this year. There will be an online tour on our Facebook page at 11 o'clock, so I hope you can join me for that as well. But in the meantime, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for all your lovely comments, and I'll speak to you next week.